Hi everyone, welcome to our comprehensive guide on understanding the threats, risks, and vulnerabilities in cybersecurity. Now this video is very important because whether you're preparing for the CompTIA Security Plus certification, the CISSP, SSCP, CCSP, or even the Certified Ethical Hacker exam, this concept is very crucial for the success of your exam. In this video, we're going to break down the fundamental topics, which are threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. And this will help you to ace your exam and also build a strong foundation in cybersecurity. Now we're going to start off immediately with the video. So in cybersecurity, you need to understand the concepts of threats, risks, and vulnerabilities because it is crucial for protecting an organization's assets. These three components are interrelated and they form the very foundation of a robust cybersecurity strategy. We are also going to go ahead and define what threats are. A threat in cybersecurity is any event or circumstance that has the potential to cause harm to an information system, and this is through unauthorized access, destruction, disclosure, modification of data, and/or denial of service. Threats can be intentional or non-intentional, and an intentional threat is a threat that is done with malicious intent to cause harm to an information system. And we have various types of intentional threats like phishing, malware, man-in-the-middle attacks, denial of service attacks, espionage, as well as advanced persistent threats. Phishing attack is a method of trying to gather personal information using deceptive means like deceptive emails and websites. A malware is a malicious software that is designed to damage, disrupt, or gain unauthorized access to computer systems. We have various examples of malware like ransomware, viruses, and worms. The man-in-the-middle attack is such that an attacker secretly intercepts and relays messages between two parties, and they believe they are actually communicating directly with each other. The denial of service attacks are intended to shut down a network or a machine, thereby making it inaccessible to the intended users. Espionage is the unauthorized spying to gather information, and it usually involves state-sponsored activities or even corporate espionage. Advanced persistent threats are prolonged and targeted cyber attacks where an intruder or bad actor gains access to a network and remains in that network undetected for an extended period of time. So these are some of the intentional threats in cybersecurity. For unintentional threats, they could be human error due to misconfigurations and accidental deletion. It could also be incorrect settings in software, networks, or system, which can leave the system vulnerable to attacks. It could also be as a result of physical damage due to natural disasters or accidental damage due to spills, drops, or physical actions that harm data or software. A system failure can occur due to interruptions in power supply or even failure in hardware components. Other types of unintentional errors are negligence or improper disposal of data. For negligence, this could be as a result of inadequate security measures, that is, failure to follow best practices or even the implementation of the necessary security controls. Other forms of negligence could be poor password management, like using weak passwords or failing to change the default password. For improper disposal of data, it could be the recycling of old hardware without properly erasing or destroying the sensitive data. So these are some of the examples of unintentional threats that could be encountered in cybersecurity. It is very important to identify threats, and this is usually the first step towards an effective risk management. And to do this, you need to understand the motive, the opportunity that is present, and also the means. The motive is the reason behind a threat actor's action. A motive is a reason behind the threat actor's action. An opportunity is the circumstances that allows the threat actor to carry out that act, while the means are the resources and the skills that a threat actor has at their disposal to commit these cyber crimes. So these are the three concepts you need to know for proper threat identification. A risk in cybersecurity is the potential for loss or damage when a threat exploits a vulnerability. Risks can impact an organization's operations, assets, individuals, and reputation. So to mitigate against this, first we have to assess the risk and then know the means with which to manage the risk. This can be done first of all by identifying the assets. So you need to determine what data, systems, and resources are critical to the organization. You need to identify the threats by recognizing the potential threats that could exploit the vulnerabilities in the organization. You need to assess the vulnerabilities by identifying the weaknesses that could be exploited by these threats. The next step is to analyze the impact. So you evaluate the potential impact and likelihood of the various threats exploiting vulnerabilities. The last stage is to develop and implement measures to reduce these risks to acceptable levels such as firewalls, encryption, and regular updates. The next thing we need to understand in this topic is vulnerabilities. A vulnerability is a weakness in a system or application that could be exploited by a threat to gain unauthorized access to or perform unauthorized actions on the system. We have various types of vulnerabilities, which could be software vulnerabilities. This could be bugs or unpatched software, as well as zero-day vulnerabilities. We also have the network vulnerabilities. These are the weaknesses in the network that can be exploited, like the poor firewall configurations and unprotected open ports. That is why one of the best practices is to ensure that all unused ports in the network are closed. Other types of vulnerabilities are the human vulnerabilities, which arises from human actions or inactions, like weak passwords or even lack of security training. And the last one is the physical vulnerabilities, such as inadequate access control to sensitive areas. Now, the next thing we need to know is that threats, risks, and vulnerabilities are interconnected. So a threat exploits a vulnerability, and this creates a risk. Now, for instance, in a phishing attack, the threat exploits the lack of employee training on recognizing phishing emails. So when this employee clicks on these phishing emails, it leads to potential data breaches, which is the risk. For a real-world example, we can see like a ransomware attack where the hacker targets outdated software, which is a vulnerability, and this leads to the shutdown of critical systems. This is the risk involved. Now, we can calculate the quantity of risk with a formula, which is threat times vulnerability times the impact. The impact is the potential damage or loss that could be caused by the threat exploiting the vulnerability. And this is measured in terms of financial loss, reputational damage, operational disruption, or even legal consequences. The likelihood of the threat is the probability that a given threat will exploit a vulnerability. So in the example given earlier, so for the ransomware attack, which is the threat, it targets the outdated software, which is a vulnerability, and this leads to a shutdown of critical systems. That is the risk. If we are to calculate the risk for this scenario given, so for instance, let's say the likelihood of the threat is on a scale of 0 to 1 is a 0.4, then the vulnerability on a scale of 0 to 1 is 0.6, where 1 is highly vulnerable. And then the impact of this is, let's just say $100,000. So to quantify the risk, we're going to say the threat 0.4 times the vulnerability, 0.6, times the impact, $100,000. This will give us $24,000. So this means that the quantified risk in this scenario is $24,000, and we see that this is really on the high side. Now, there are various best practices we can implement to manage cyber threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. The first is to ensure that regular security audits are conducted in order to identify and address these vulnerabilities. Secondly, we need to implement employee training and awareness, because your employees are the first line of defense. They are your human firewall. So we need to train employees to recognize and respond to cyber threats. The third is implementation of security policies and procedures. So in every organization, there needs to be an established security policy, and it should be ensured that they are followed. So this can be due to what we've mentioned before, regular security audits, to ensure that the laid down security policies and procedures are being followed. The fourth best practice is to use advanced security tools and technologies. So tools like the intrusion detection system can be deployed. Encryption should also be deployed, as well as multi-factor authentication. The last that can be done, but certainly not the least, is to develop and practice incident response plans in order to quickly and effectively respond to security breaches. Now, if these best practices are implemented, the organization will be safer. It's not as if the threats can be eradicated totally, but at least it will, put some boundaries to how often the organization is attacked. In conclusion, understanding and managing threats, risks, and vulnerabilities is very fundamental to maintaining a robust cybersecurity. By recognizing the interplay between these elements, that is the threats, risks, and vulnerabilities, and then implementing best practices, organizations can significantly reduce their exposure to cyber attacks and enhance their overall security posture. This brings us to the end of understanding threats, risks, and vulnerabilities, and we're going to take 5 quick practice questions on these concepts. Now, question 1. Which of the following best describes a vulnerability? A potential cause of an unwanted incident. B, the likelihood of a threat exploiting a weakness. C, a weakness in a system that can be exploited by a threat. D, the potential damage caused by an exploited weakness. Based on what we've just gone through, the answer should be quite obvious. The answer here is option C. A vulnerability is a flaw or weakness in a system's design, implementation, operation, or management that can be exploited by a threat to cause harm. If we check on the other options, we will see that for option A potential cause of an unwanted incident, that actually describes a threat. Option B, the likelihood of a threat exploiting a weakness, that actually describes a risk. So the correct answer for a vulnerability is a weakness in a system that can be exploited by a threat. Question 2. Which of the following is an example of an intentional threat? A, earthquake. B, malware attack. C, accidental data deletion. D, hardware failure. First of all, an intentional threat is done with malicious intent to cause harm. So if we check, option A is an earthquake. It's an unintentional threat because it is not caused by a deliberate human action. Option B, a malware attack, is definitely an intentional threat because it involves malicious software deliberately created and deployed to cause harm or steal data. Accidental data deletion is unintentional. This can happen due to human error and it doesn't have any malicious intent. while hardware failure is also an example of unintentional threat because it occurs due to a mechanical or technical issue. So the answer here is option B, a malware attack. This is a deliberate creation and deployment of a malicious software to cause harm, steal data, or disrupt services. Question 3. In the context of risk management, which formula is used to quantify risk? A. Risk is equals to vulnerability plus impact. B. Risk is equals to threat times impact. C. Risk equals threat times vulnerability times impact. D. Risk equals impact over threat times vulnerability. The answer here is option C. To quantify risk, it involves three critical components, which are threats, vulnerability, and impact. A threat is a potential cause of an unwanted incident. A vulnerability is the weakness that can be exploited, while the impact is the potential damage or loss if the threat exploits the vulnerability. So by multiplying these three factors, the formula will provide a comprehensive assessment of risk. Question 4. What is the primary purpose of a risk assessment? A. To eliminate all vulnerabilities in a system. B. To prioritize security efforts and allocate resources effectively. C. To identify and exploit vulnerabilities in a system. D. To ensure compliance with regulatory requirements. The answer here is option B. The primary purpose of a risk assessment is to prioritize security efforts and allocate resources effectively. A risk assessment helps to identify the potential risks, evaluate their potential impacts, and prioritize them based on their likelihood and severity. This allows organizations to focus their resources where they are most needed in order to mitigate risks effectively. Question 5. Which of the following is an unintentional threat? A. Insider threats. B. Denial of service. C. Social engineering. D. Software bug. The answer here is option D. A software bug is an unintentional error or flaw in software code that can potentially cause security vulnerability or operational disruptions. Unlike intentional threats like insider threats, denial of service, and social engineering, a software bug is just a coding mistake or unforeseen interactions within a system. This brings us to the end of the video for understanding threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and also leave a comment in the comment section if you found this video to be helpful to you towards your preparation for the exam. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.